Story 1. The Brushstrokes of the Fallen. The Key West sun sank into the Gulf, painting the sky a bruised orange as my parents, Jim and Carol, rolled into town for their honeymoon in the summer of 1983. They'd driven down from Tampa in Dad's beat-up Chevy Nova, a wedding gift from his brother, the car's engine coughing like it resented the trip. Mom, still glowing in her thrift store sundress, had picked the Seaside Inn from a travel brochure, a pastel pink building on Duval Street, promising ocean views and old Florida charm. They were young, broke, and giddy, ready for a week of cheap rum and sunburns. But when they shuffled into the lobby, luggage in tow, the clerk, a wiry guy with a sunburned nose, frowned at their reservation. "Room's non-smoking," he said, eyeing Dad's pack of Marlboros peeking from his shirt pocket. Dad groaned, but Mom nudged him, and they swapped for a smoking room on the third floor, blissfully unaware of what waited upstairs. The elevator rattled up, spitting them into a hallway thick with the stench of fresh paint, sharp, chemical, stinging their noses. Mom coughed, waving a hand while Dad muttered, "They redoing the place or what?" Halfway down the corridor, they found him, a painter crouched over a drop cloth, his back to them. He was a lanky figure in stained overalls, a baseball cap pulled low, surrounded by cans of white paint, and a roller dripping onto the tarp. The wall gleamed wet, half-finished, streaks of primer glistening under the flickering fluorescent lights. "Hey man," Dad called, casual as they passed. "Looks good." Mom chimed in with a quick hi, but the painter didn't turn, didn't flinch, just kept rolling the brush, slow and steady like he hadn't heard. They shrugged it off, rude guy, whatever, and pushed on to room 312, the last door on the left. Inside, the paint smell hit harder, a choking fog that burned their eyes. The room was small, peeling floral wallpaper, a lumpy bed, a window cracked open to the humid night, but the odor was unbearable, seeping from the walls like a living thing. "This is nuts," Dad said, dropping their bags, his cigarette already lit despite the irony. Mom nodded, fanning her face. "We can't sleep in this. Let's switch." They trudged back to the lobby, the clerk's frown deepening as Dad explained. "Room stinks like a paint factory. You got anything else?" The guy blinked, puzzled. "Paint? No one's working up there today. Maintenance is off Sundays." Mom cut in. "We just saw him. Guy in the hall, painting the wall." The clerk's face tightened, but he handed over a new key, room 204, second floor, muttering, "I'll check it out," though his voice wavered. Back on the third floor to grab their stuff, the hallway was silent. No hum of rollers, no drip of paint. The painter was gone. The drop cloth, cans, brush, all vanished, the wall dry and untouched, its faded beige staring back like nothing had happened. The smell was gone too, replaced by a stale, salty breeze from the open window at the end of the hall. Dad froze, cigarette dangling from his lips. "What the hell?" he whispered, his hand brushing the wall, cool, solid, no trace of wet paint. Mom clutched his arm, her breath quickening. "He was right there, Jim. We saw him." They stood, staring at the empty space, a chill creeping up their spines despite the sticky heat. "Let's just go," Mom said, voice small, and they grabbed their bags, fleeing to the new room without looking back. Room 204 was fine, musty but livable, no paint fumes, and they tried to shake it off, blaming exhaustion from the drive. They crashed early, the ocean's murmur lulling them into uneasy sleep. But the next morning changed everything. Heading to breakfast at a diner across the street, they passed a tour group in the lobby, a guide in a loud Hawaiian shirt spinning tales for sunburned tourists. Dad lit another cigarette, half listening, until the guide's voice sharpened. "And up on the third floor, folks, we've got a real ghost story." Mom stopped, tugging Dad's sleeve, and they edged closer as the guide went on. Back in '57, a painter was fixing that hall, 3rd floor near the elevator. Poor guy slipped, fell down the shaft, snapped his neck, died right there. Guests still see him, hear him, brushing away late at night. Some smell the paint too, fresh as the day he fell. The words sank in, cold and heavy, like a stone in their stomachs. Mom's face drained, her hand trembling on Dad's arm. "That's our floor," she whispered, eyes wide. "Room 312. Right down from the elevator. Dad's cigarette fell, ash scattering on the tile, his voice hoarse. "We saw him, Carol, yesterday." The guide droned on, oblivious, but they didn't hear the rest, just stood there, the lobby spinning, the memory of that silent painter sharpening into something awful. They'd walked past a ghost, smelled his work, spoken to him, and he'd ignored them, locked in his endless task. They didn't tell anyone, not the clerk, not friends back home. The honeymoon went on, beaches, drinks, forced smiles, but the 3rd floor hung over them, a shadow they couldn't shake. They avoided the elevator after that, taking the stairs, and never went near room 312 again. When they left Key West, the Seaside Inn faded into a story they rarely told, a quiet pact to bury it. But it didn't stay buried. Years later, in their Tampa bungalow, Mom would wake from nightmares, gasping about paint fumes, while Dad swore he'd hear a soft shh. A brush on drywall in the dead of night. I heard it too once as a kid sleeping over, a faint stroke in the dark, and saw Dad's face go white when I mentioned it. They didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but after Key West, something shifted. A crack in their world where the fallen painter still worked, his brush strokes echoing through time, waiting for someone new to walk his hall. Story 2. The figure behind the screen. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my cluttered bedroom, casting jagged shadows across the posters and piled laundry in suburban Ohio. It was a Friday night in March 2012, and I, Nikki, a lanky 20-year-old with a mop of dark hair, was sprawled on my bed, Skyping my girlfriend, Sam. She was 30 miles away in Dayton, holed up in her family's split-level house, her webcam framing her freckled face and messy blonde bun against the backdrop of her purple bedroom walls. We'd been dating 6 months, a lifeline of late-night calls keeping us close despite the distance. And tonight she was in a mood, playful, restless, her voice crackling through my headphones. "Come over, Nick," she whined, pouting at the screen. "Stay the night. It's lonely here." I laughed, rubbing my eyes. "It's 1 a.m., babe. I'm not driving now." Her house was empty, her parents off at a weekend conference, her little brother at a sleepover, and she hated being alone, always had. We bantered back and forth, me teasing her about horror movies she'd never watch solo, her daring me to brave the dark roads. The call stretched on, a comfortable hum of nonsense, until I noticed it. Her closet door, just visible over her shoulder, cracked open an inch. The narrow gap showed nothing but black, a sliver of shadow in her bright room, but it caught my eye, a tiny itch of unease. "Hey, your closet's open," I said, pointing at the screen. She twisted around, squinting, then shrugged. "Oh, yeah, probably forgot to shut it. No biggie." I nodded, brushing it off, and we kept talking, plans for the weekend, a dumb meme I'd seen. But my gaze kept drifting back to that crack, a dark line that didn't sit right. Half an hour later, it happened again. The door had shifted, now open a few inches more, the gap wider, the shadow deeper. I frowned, leaning closer to my screen. "Sam, your closet. It's opening more." She turned, slower this time, her brow creasing as she stared. "Weird," she muttered, then forced a laugh. "Maybe the window's pushing it. It's open a bit." She pointed off screen, but her voice faltered, and I saw it. A flicker of doubt in her green eyes. Check it, I said, half joking. But she waved me off. Nah, it's fine. Probably my brother's junk shifting around. We moved on, talking about nothing. But the itch grew, a cold prickle on my neck I couldn't shake. The door stayed there, silent, gaping, like a mouth starting to speak. Another 30 minutes ticked by, the clock hitting 2 a.m., and Sam was mid-sentence, something about a concert next month, when it happened. The closet door swung wide, smooth and deliberate, and a figure stepped out. Tall, thin, draped in a dark hoodie, it moved with a slow, unnatural grace, slipping out of her room without a sound. My heart stopped, a scream lodging in my throat as I stared, frozen, at the screen. Sam didn't notice, still chattering, her back to the door, oblivious. "Sam!" I yelled, voice cracking through the headphones. She jumped, eyes widening. "What?" "Someone just walked out of your closet," I shouted, pointing, my hand shaking. She laughed, nervous. "What? No way. My brother's not here." Her words cut off as I snapped. "You're alone, right? You said you're alone." Her face drained of color, the realization hitting like a punch. She spun around, staring at the open closet, now empty, the door swaying slightly. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice trembling, and bolted to her bedroom door, slamming it shut and fumbling the lock. A scream ripped from her, a raw, piercing wail that echoed through the call, chilling my blood. "Lock it! Call the cops!" I yelled, already grabbing my phone, my hands slick with sweat. "I'm coming! Stay there!" She nodded, tears streaming, and darted off screen. The call still lived, her panicked breaths crackling in my ears. I dialed 911 as I ran to my car, barking her address to the dispatcher, the night swallowing me as I peeled out of the driveway. The 30-mile drive was a blur, my Ford Focus roaring down empty highways, heart pounding, Sam's scream looping in my head. I kept the call open, her whimpers faint over the engine's growl, until the line went dead 10 minutes out. Connection lost, or worse. I floored it, tires screeching as I hit her street and saw the flashing lights. 2 cop cars parked crooked in her driveway, the front door gaping wide. I stumbled out, legs shaking, and ran inside, shouting her name. An officer stopped me at her room, his face grim. "She's okay. Shaken up, but safe." They'd busted her door down, found her curled in the corner, eyes glassy with shock. Sam told them later, voice hoarse. She'd seen him, a man in a hoodie, face to face through the crack before she slammed the door. He'd stood there, silent, staring, then vanished. The cops found no one, no forced entry, just an open window in the basement they figured he'd climbed through. They called it a prowler, a random creep, but I saw the closet on that screen. Empty 1 second, alive the next. We never Skyped again, and Sam moved out soon after, the house a memory she couldn't face. Now, years later, when I'm alone at night, the screen dark, I feel it, that prickle like eyes on me. And I hear her scream, see that figure stepping out, a shadow that knew her house was empty, waiting for her to turn away. Story 3, The Grin in the Glass. The storm rolled into our Cincinnati suburb like a living thing, thunder growling low and lightning splitting the sky in jagged white veins. It was a Friday night in late October 2014, and I was 16, sprawled on my bed in our creaky 2-story house, the TV flickering with Forrest Gump for the 100th time. I loved storms, their raw chaos, the way rain lashed the windows like a drumbeat. And with Dad working the night shift at the warehouse, I had the place to myself. The power held steady despite the wind's howls, and I let the movie's credits roll, the house settling into its usual groans as the clock ticked past 2 a.m. Storms made sleep easy, a lullaby of nature's fury. So I flicked off the TV, plunging the room into darkness, and burrowed under the covers, the thunder a distant rumble. I'd barely closed my eyes when it came, a sharp thwack against my window. Not the patter of rain, but something solid, deliberate. My breath caught, eyes snapping open, but I stayed still, listening. The storm raged on, rain drumming the roof, and I chalked it up to a branch, a stray twig caught in the wind. Then it hit again, thwack, louder, heavier, a rock striking glass with purpose. My heart kicked up, a steady thud against my ribs, and I slid out of bed, bare feet cold on the hardwood. "Dad," I muttered, knowing he wasn't due home till dawn, knowing he'd call if something was wrong. Another thwack, sharper, and I crept to the window, peering through the blinds, my breath fogging the pain. The backyard was a blur of rain and swaying trees, the street lamp's glow barely piercing the downpour. Nothing, no figure, no movement, just the storm's chaos. But the TV had been on minutes ago, its light spilling out, a beacon to anyone watching. Whack, whack, 2 hits now, faster, the glass trembling under the blows. My stomach twisted, a cold sweat prickling my neck. Someone was out there, knew I was here and wasn't stopping. I backed away, pulse racing, telling myself to ignore it. Let them get bored, give up. But the rocks kept coming, a relentless thwack, 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 each one louder, closer together like a countdown. The rain eased, a sudden lull, and then I heard it. A low growl, the rumble of a truck engine idling down the street. My blood froze, the sound cutting through the storm's fade, too real, too near. Another rock slammed the window. Crack! The loudest yet, and I jolted, fear overriding reason. "Enough!" I hissed, grabbing my phone from the nightstand and bolting downstairs, the house creaking with every step. The plan was simple. Call the cops, wait it out. But as I passed the front door, I saw it. A face, pale and blurred, pressed against the small glass panel at the top. Lightning flashed, sharp and brutal, and there it was. A wide, crooked grin, teeth glinting, eyes lost in shadow, staring right at me. A yell tore from my throat, raw and panicked, and I stumbled back, phone slipping from my grip. The face vanished, the grin swallowed by darkness, but the doorknob rattled, frantic then forceful, a heavy thud as something rammed the frame. I lunged for the kitchen, snatching a knife from the block, its blade trembling in my hand. "The cops are coming!" I shouted, voice cracking, praying they'd hear, praying it'd scare them off. The ramming stopped, abrupt and eerie, and I stood there panting, the storm's roar flooding back. No more rocks, no more thuds, just silence, thick and wrong, pressing against the walls. I dialed 911, babbling about rocks and a face, my words tripping over each other as I gripped the knife, eyes locked on the door. "Officers nearby," the dispatcher said, calm and distant. "Stay put." Minutes crawled. 5, 10, and then tires crunched outside, a siren's wail cutting the night. The doorbell rang, sharp and jarring, and I peeked through the blinds, relief flooding me at the sight of a cop car, its lights flashing red and blue. I opened the door, knife still in hand, and spilled everything to Officer Hayes. A stocky guy with a tired face, rain dripping off his hat. "Saw him at the door," I said, voice shaky, grinning, trying to get in. Hayes swept the yard with his flashlight. Nothing but mud and fallen branches, no footprints, no truck tracks in the soaked driveway. "Storm's a mess," he grunted, checking the window upstairs, intact, no cracks, just wet streaks where rocks had hit. "Could have been kids, punks messing around," he said. But his eyes lingered on the door, the glass panels smudged with rain. No trace of a face. I described it. Pale, grinning, shadowed eyes, but it sounded thin, hollow, even to me. "Didn't see a truck," I admitted, regret clawing at me. "Should have looked closer." He nodded, scribbling notes, and left with the promise to patrol. but they never caught anyone. No leads, no evidence, just my word against the night. Dad got home at dawn, found me on the couch, knife by my side, and didn't question it. Just hugged me, quiet, like he knew. We never talked much about it after, but I couldn't shake it. That grin, wide and wrong, burned into my brain. The house felt different after that. Watched, waiting. Now, years later, in my own place, storms bring it back. The thwack of rocks, the rumble of an engine, and that face, grinning through glass I can't see. I lock every door, check every window, but when thunder rolls, I hear it. A faint tap, a soft chuckle, and I know it's out there, somewhere, smiling, waiting for me to look again. The woods off County Road 12 in rural Indiana were a tangled sprawl of oak and pine, their shadows swallowing the sunlight even in mid-July. I was 18 that summer of 2005, dragged along on my family's first camping trip. A half-baked idea from my 11-year-old twin siblings, Matt and Lucy, who'd begged until Dad gave in. We weren't the outdoorsy type. Dad was a mechanic, Mom a bank teller, and I'd rather be gaming than swatting bugs. But there we were, driving our rusty station wagon an hour from home. Dad pulled off onto a dirt shoulder, no campsite in sight, and declared we'd hike in to rough it. We trudged a mile through the underbrush, sweat sticking my shirt to my back, until we found a clearing. A patchy circle of grass ringed by trees, the air thick with the buzz of cicadas. We set up 2 tents, one for Mom and Dad, a sagging blue dome, and one for me and the twins, a faded green thing that smelled like mildew. By dusk, the fire crackled, casting flickers across our faces as we roasted marshmallows, the twins giggling over sticky fingers. I played along, half listening to Dad's stories about fixing cars, but my eyes kept drifting to the woods, the way the branches swayed without wind, the rustles that didn't match the breeze. Night fell fast, the sky bruising purple, and we crawled into our tents. Mom and Dad zipped theirs shut, their murmurs fading, while I lay on my sleeping bag, the twins already snoring beside me. The ground was hard, poking through the thin fabric, and the forest noises, crickets, owls, something bigger snapping twigs, kept me wide awake. I tossed and turned for hours, the heat inside the tent stifling, despite the cool night air. My phone, dead since noon, offered no escape, and the twins' breathing was the only steady sound. Around midnight, I gave up, staring at the tent ceiling when it happened. A soft, slow zip, the sound of our tent flap unzipping. My head snapped up, heart thudding, and I saw it. A shadow against the nylon, a head poking through the gap. The fire had died to embers outside, leaving just a faint glow, but it was enough to outline a shape. Broad shoulders, a neck too long, too still. "Dad?" I whispered, voice cracking, hoping it was him checking on us. The head didn't move, didn't answer, just hovered there, silent and wrong. "Dad?" I said louder, sitting up, my sleeping bag rustling. The figure pulled back, quick and jerky, like a puppet yanked by strings, and the flap fell half open. Footsteps crunched outside, fast, retreating into the trees. My stomach dropped, a cold sweat prickling my skin. That wasn't Dad. His boots were heavy, deliberate. These were light, erratic. I scrambled out of my bag, heart racing, and crawled to the flap, peering into the dark. The clearing was empty, the embers glowing faintly, the woods a wall of black beyond. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam shaky in my hand, and unzipped Mom and Dad's tent, ducking inside. They were there, sprawled in their sleeping bags, Dad's snores rumbling. I shook him awake, his eyes bleary as he grunted. "What's wrong?" "Did you check on us just now?" I asked, voice tight. "No," he mumbled, rubbing his face. I turned to Mom, shaking her shoulder. "Was it you?" She stirred, groggy, and shook her head. "Haven't left the tent, hun." My blood ran cold, goosebumps crawling up my arms. "Someone opened our tent," I said, the words tumbling out. Looked inside, then ran off. Dad sat up, frowning, while Mom clutched her blanket, suddenly alert. "You sure it wasn't a dream?" he asked, but I shook my head, insistent. "I heard the zipper, saw the shadow. It wasn't you." Dad grabbed his flashlight and a tire iron from the car kit, muttering about raccoons or drunks, and stepped outside, me trailing close. The beam swept the clearing, nothing but grass, our dying fire, the trees looming silent. He circled our tent, checked the flap, still half unzipped, but the ground showed no footprints, the dirt too dry to hold them. "Probably just some animal," he said, though his grip on the tire iron stayed tight. Mom peeked out, her face pale, and whispered, "Let's pack up at dawn." I nodded, too shaken to argue, and crawled back into our tent, the twins still asleep, oblivious to the terror coiling in my chest. Sleep didn't come. I lay there, flashlight clutched, eyes locked on the flap, every rustle outside spiking my pulse. Around 3 a.m. it returned, a faint scratch, like nails dragging on nylon, right at the tent's edge. My breath stopped, the beam snapping to the wall, but nothing showed. No shadow, no shape. The sound circled, slow and deliberate, a predator testing its cage, then stopped by the flap again. I didn't dare move, didn't breathe until the first light of dawn crept through the trees, washing the night away. We broke camp fast, Dad silent, Mom jumpy, the twins whining about leaving early. I didn't care. I just wanted out. We never camped again, never talked about it much, but I couldn't forget. Months later, I overheard a gas station clerk mention a hiker gone missing near County Road 12 that summer. Last seen a mile from our spot, never found. No one believed my story, not fully, but I know what I saw. That head, that shadow, too human, too wrong. Now, in my quiet apartment, when the wind picks up and the dark presses close, I hear it. That soft zip, and I see it again. A face in the gap, watching, waiting. A stranger who knew exactly where we were. Story 4. The Claw at the Edge. The house on Pine Hollow Road was a sagging shell, its cracked siding peeling under the weight of neglect in a forgotten corner of rural Kentucky. It was the kind of place where the wind whispered through gaps in the walls, carrying the faint tang of rot from the woods beyond. Jacob was 11 that summer of 1996, a wiry kid with wary eyes, living with his father, Ray, a quiet mechanic with calloused hands, and his mother, Lila, whose addiction had hollowed her into a ghost of herself. The night it happened, the air hung heavy with July heat, the kind that stuck to your skin like damp cloth, and the cicadas buzzed a relentless drone outside. Jacob and Ray slept in the back bedroom, a cramped space with a single window, while Lila stayed in her own room down the hall, barricaded behind a door Ray rarely crossed anymore. It started after midnight, a sudden violent bang that jolted Jacob awake, his heart slamming against his ribs. He sat up, sheets tangled around his legs, the room dim under a sliver of moonlight seeping through the blinds. Ray was already on his feet, a silhouette against the wall, his breath sharp and uneven. Another bang, then a frantic scratch, like nails clawing wood, erupting from Lila's room. Something heavy thudded, dragging across the floor, and Jacob's stomach twisted, a cold dread pooling inside him. Ray cursed under his breath, snatching a flashlight from the dresser, its beam trembling as he stormed down the hall, Jacob trailing close, barefoot and shivering despite the heat. "Lila!" Ray pounded the door, fists shaking the flimsy wood. "Open up! What's going on?" The noises stopped, a suffocating silence settling in, broken only by the creak of the house. The door creaked open, and Lila stood there, bleary-eyed in a stained nightgown, her hair a wild tangle. "What the hell's your problem?" she slurred, voice thick with sleep or something darker. "You woke me up." Ray shoved past her, flashlight sweeping the room, and Jacob peeked in, his breath catching. The window gaped wide, curtains fluttering like pale ghosts, and the old CRT television, usually bolted to a rickety stand, was dragged across the floor, its cord stretched to taut, screen facing out into the night, as if someone had tried to pull it through. "What's this?" Ray demanded, his voice tight, pointing at the TV. Lila blinked, swaying, and shrugged. "I don't know. Was asleep." Jacob edged closer, the air from the window cold and wrong, carrying a faint sour whiff, like wet earth and decay. Ray's face hardened. He'd seen her high before, but this was different. No needle marks, no glaze in her eyes, just confusion. "Something's off," he muttered, slamming the window shut, the glass rattling in its frame. He grabbed a screwdriver from a drawer, jamming it into the lock, then hauled Lila's mattress to the living room, shoving it against the couch. "You're sleeping here," he growled, bolting her door from the outside. Jacob watched, silent, the unease gnawing deeper. Whatever had moved that TV wasn't her. Ray didn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen, a baseball bat across his lap, the flashlight's beam fixed on the hallway, its shadows stretching long and jagged. Jacob curled on a chair nearby, too scared to go back to bed, the house creaking under the wind's assault. At 5 a.m., still dark, Ray shook him awake, eyes bloodshot and wild. "Get up," he whispered, nodding toward the counter where Lila sat, sipping coffee, her hands trembling. Jacob stumbled over, rubbing sleep from his eyes when Ray froze, wide-eyed, pointing at them both and pressing a finger to his lips. "Shh." They hushed, the air thickening, and then it came. A soft shuffle, faint but deliberate, moving across the roof from one edge to the other, like footsteps pacing the shingles. Jacob's throat tightened, a chill racing down his spine. Ray gripped the bat, knuckles white, and they sat, huddled in the dim kitchen, listening as the shuffling circled, slow, methodical, a predator mapping its prey. The sound paused, then shifted, heavier, closer to the chimney, and Jacob swore he heard a low rasp, like breath scraping through a throat not quite human. Minutes stretched, endless and taut, until it stopped, the silence worse than the noise, pressing against them like a weight. Ray exhaled, shaky, and dialed Grandma Ruth, his voice low as he begged her to take them in. "Something's here," he said, glancing at the ceiling. "We can't stay." She agreed, promising to drive over, her truck a lifeline in the dark. Jacob finished his cereal, the spoon clinking too loud in the quiet, and shuffled to the living room, sinking onto the couch. No TV here, just stillness, the shadows pooling thick. His eyes drifted to the hallway, to the door of an empty storage room, always locked, now ajar. Finger curled around the frame, long, pale, unnaturally thick, wrapping clear around the edge like a claw, the wood groaning under its grip. It wasn't human, too wide, too rigid, like foam stretched over bone, glinting faintly in the gloom. Jacob screamed, a high, piercing wail, pointing as Ray bolted up, scooping him into his arms. Lila stumbled after them, coffee spilling, and they ran. Out the front door, down the gravel drive to the gas station a half-mile away, breath fogging in the pre-dawn chill. They sat on the curb, shivering, until Grandma Ruth's truck rumbled up, her face pale as Ray spilled the story. They grabbed their things days later under daylight and never returned. The house abandoned, its windows dark. Nothing was stolen, but the storage room window hung open, a silent invitation. Jacob still sees that finger in his nightmares, curled, waiting, its claw-like grip a promise of something watching, pacing, ready to claw its way back into their lives. Story 5, The Boiler Room. When I was 10 years old, my parents decided to repaint our bedrooms. a seemingly innocuous home improvement project that would force my 1-year-old brother Ben and me to sleep in the basement for a weekend. The acrid smell of fresh paint made the upstairs uninhabitable, and rather than sending us to our grandparents, my parents set up temporary sleeping arrangements in our rarely used basement. The basement of our colonial-style home was like most unfinished concrete walls, exposed pipes crisscrossing the ceiling, and that perpetual chill that no amount of heating seemed to affect. A pull-out sofa had been relegated there years before, its cushions holding the musty scent of disuse. Ben's portable crib, dragged down from his nursery, looked starkly out of place against the gray backdrop. "It's just for 2 nights," my mother assured me, arranging extra blankets on the sofa bed. "The paint will be dry by Sunday." I nodded, trying to appear brave, though the basement had always unsettled me. During daylight hours, with sunlight filtering through the small rectangular windows near the ceiling, it was merely an uninviting space. But at night, those same windows turned into black voids, and the shadows seemed to stretch and warp in the corners. The boiler room was the epicenter of my unease. A small utility closet set into the far wall of the basement, it housed our ancient heating system, a massive iron beast that clanked and groaned like some mechanical leviathan. The door to this room never properly closed, perpetually ajar by a few inches, the darkness beyond it absolute. That first night, with my parents safely upstairs, I lay on the pull-out sofa staring at the ceiling, listening to Ben's soft breathing from his crib a few feet away. I'd left a small lamp on, its weak yellow glow creating a pathetic island of light in the expansive darkness. The boiler kicked on with a startling thump, making me jolt upright before I recognized the familiar sound. Its subsequent rumbling was almost comforting in its normalcy. Surprisingly, I fell asleep easily, exhausted from helping my father move furniture earlier that day. What seemed like moments later, I was awakened by Ben's crying, a normal occurrence with a 1-year-old. I checked my digital watch, 2:17 a.m. Wiping sleep from my eyes, I stumbled to his crib. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, reaching in to pat his back. "It's okay." Ben settled almost immediately at my touch, and I was about to return to my makeshift bed when he started up again. Not crying this time, but babbling excitedly, as he sometimes did when our cat entered a room or when our father came home from work. "Shh, Ben, go back to sleep," I murmured, my eyes heavy with interrupted slumber. But Ben stood up in his crib, bouncing slightly on his mattress, pointing insistently toward the far wall, toward the boiler room door, which seemed wider open than it had been earlier. "Ba-ba-bo," he exclaimed, his standard baby proclamation for anything that caught his interest. I followed his gesture, squinting into the darkness. "There's nothing there, Ben. Go to sleep." But he continued, growing more animated, his little arm outstretched and finger aimed with unwavering certainty at the boiler room's threshold. Something in his intense focus caused a cold, heavy sensation to bloom in my chest. 1-year-olds don't pretend. They don't imagine things for effect. They react to what they perceive. And Ben was perceiving something by that door. I strained my eyes, willing them to penetrate the darkness. The lamp's meager light didn't reach that far corner, leaving it in shadow. But as I stared, I began to discern something wrong about the quality of that darkness. It seemed denser somehow, more textured than mere absence of light should be. Then Ben let out a sound that haunts me to this day. Not a cry, not a laugh, but a scream. High-pitched and primal, the kind that triggers a visceral response in anyone who hears it. He wasn't looking at me. His wide, terrified eyes remained locked on the boiler room door as he screamed and screamed. The basement's acoustics amplified his cries, bouncing them off concrete walls in a cacophony that surely would alert my parents upstairs. But in that moment, I couldn't think about rescue, because as Ben screamed, I heard something else. A soft thud from the boiler room, followed by a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Ice flooded my veins. My body vibrated with the certainty of danger, with the knowledge that whatever Ben saw, whatever I couldn't quite see, was real and immediate. The darkness in the doorway seemed to shift, to coalesce into something more solid, though still indistinct. But it was the feeling that overwhelmed me most, an oppressive weight of malevolence that pressed against my skin like a physical force. I felt watched, evaluated, measured by something ancient and patient that had been waiting in that room for who knows how long. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. Pure instinct took over as I lunged for Ben's crib, scooped him into my arms, and bolted for the basement stairs. His little body clung to me with surprising strength, his face buried against my neck, his screams now muffled against my skin. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling twice, my heart hammering so violently I could feel it in my throat. I didn't look back. Some primal part of my brain warned that turning around would be the worst mistake I could make. That if I saw what was following us, because something was following us, I could feel it at my heels. I might freeze, might lose the precious seconds needed to escape. We burst into the kitchen, where I found my startled parents at the table, having come down for a late-night snack. My father jumped to his feet at the sight of us, his face transforming from surprise to alarm. "What happened? Is Ben hurt?" He reached for my brother, who was still trembling against me. I couldn't speak coherently. Between gasps for breath, I managed fragments. Boiler room. Something in there. Ben saw it. Something fell. It was watching us. My mother, practical as always, immediately checked Ben for injuries while my father grabbed a flashlight. "I'll go check it out," he said, his tone indicating he expected to find nothing. "No!" I grabbed his arm with my free hand. "Don't go down there, please." Something in my expression must have conveyed the depth of my terror, because my father hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll all stay up here tonight." We slept in the living room, all 4 of us, with every light in the house blazing. The next day, my father inspected the basement in broad daylight and found nothing unusual, though he admitted the boiler room door was standing fully open when he'd specifically remembered closing it the day before. My parents blamed an overactive imagination, coupled with the stress of sleeping in an unfamiliar space. The paint fumes might have contributed, they suggested, a perfectly rational explanation. But they didn't ask why we kept finding the boiler room door open every morning after that, no matter how securely it had been closed the night before. They didn't acknowledge how the basement temperatures would plummet inexplicably, even in summer. And they certainly never mentioned the scratching sounds that sometimes emanated from behind that door late at night. I never went into the basement alone again. When we eventually moved 3 years later, I felt nothing but relief watching that house disappear in the rearview mirror. Ben, by then 4 years old, turned to me as we drove away and said with perfect clarity, "The dark thing can't follow us now, right?" I stared at him, chill running down my spine. He had never mentioned the dark thing before, and I had certainly never spoken of that night in the basement. But he remembered, and sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if it remembers us too.